Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good evening, friends. I am back after spending the week in Houston at the NACAC conference. That's the National Association of College Admission Counselors. Huge gathering. I was told 6,000 plus were in attendance. This is where admission professionals and college counselors, where we gather together to network, to interact, to find out all the latest trends, attend workshops and hear great speakers and have awesome food. And Houston was something else. I realized that there's hot. People call hot Atlanta. That's a different kind of hot. I lived in Dallas for 7.5 years. You know, I was talking to my Lyft drivers about the difference between Dallas and Houston, and 3 different ones said, Dallas, they get snow. That place is cold. I don't really call it cold. I remember 16 straight days of 100. But it was a different kind of hot in Houston. Not quite my cup of tea, but I had an absolutely fantastic time. And what I try to do when I go to these conferences is bring back to you the things that I learn. I'll be doing that over the next several weeks in our announcement sessions. And then probably when I just finish that, I'm off to Orlando for the better part of a week for the College Board Conference for more professional development. But it was just fantastic. Probably saw 150 people I knew there. Some people I hadn't seen in the longest time. I think the last time I saw Brennan Barnard was like 2004 or 5. So just for example, it was just great to see so many people. Susan, I got to spend a lot of time with her and so many others. So I want to hit on some of the main themes that emerged that I think may be of interest to you when it comes to trends and sort of hot topics in college admissions. And I'll just be touching on them now and going into more detail in future episodes. So one of the hot topics is colleges preparing for what seems to be almost inevitable next July, when the Supreme Court is expected to outlaw race in admissions. So 40 years of being able to factor race into admissions has been in effect, with the exception of 9 states that had made it illegal in those states. And so there's a lot of angst around that topic, a lot of schools trying to figure out what they're going to do. They don't necessarily like the idea of the Supreme Court dictating to them how to run their institution and what their student body should be, but they realize it's inevitable and they're trying to get prepared for it. So some really good sessions on that. What does that mean? What changes do we need to make? That certainly was a hot topic. Another really hot topic, obviously, and this won't surprise anybody. Where are we now in this new world of test optional, test free, score free, test blind, pick your term admissions? And one thing that I did predict about 6 months ago that I'm starting to see emerge, and that is nuances, variations. I attended a great session that had VP of Enrollment from both Purdue and UIUC, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and that was fascinating. Andy Borst from Illinois was unapologetically test optional, said we absolutely don't need test scores. When we have grades, when we have curriculum, test scores don't add very much, and they're so highly correlated to family wealth privilege that they exclude very capable people that we'd love to have here. Meanwhile, Purdue had a different position, test flexible, which kind of tough to explain. You sort of contort yourself into a pretzel trying to explain that. And I felt bad. Mitch Warren is the associate vice provost there, and he probably did as good a job as you could do explaining their test flexible position. Now, test flexible is not new. Test flexible has been around for a really, really long time. But the way they explain test flexible is pretty difficult sell if you're unable to take the test. And, so you're starting to see nuances and variations. And actually, this this is a good time for me to go off a little bit on a example of this, and I'll come back to some more things from the conference. So if you've heard our podcast regularly, you know that there's only been 3 states that are currently requiring test scores. And those 3 states have been Tennessee, Florida, and Georgia. And I've said before, Georgia can't make up its mind. So the first year of the pandemic, completely test optional. The next year, they said, no, we're going back to mandatory. Then in February, they changed. And they only made it mandatory for UGA and Georgia College and Georgia Tech. And they said, we're returning to test scores for the class of fall 2023. Well, there was tremendous blowback. None of the schools want test scores. They all want the flexibility, including, by the way, UGA and Georgia Tech. So they've come up with a new policy. And I have to admit, I do respect this policy. And so this is the new policy. Effective immediately, class of 2023. And this is what I mean by nuances starting to settle in. You're starting to see variations. We're way more test optional than we used to be, but we're not fully test optional. So this is the new policy, the University System of Georgia. If you're Georgia and Georgia Tech, then you have to submit test scores, mandatory for those 2 institutions. And then they've bucketed their universities according to type of school. So the research universities, Augusta and Georgia State, you can be test optional as well, but guess what? Students need a 3.4 grade point average in order to be admitted without scores. Then the comprehensive universities like Georgia College and State, Georgia Southern, Kennesaw, University of West Georgia, and Valdosta, 3.2. 3.2, and you're good without test scores. And then they have what they call the state universities. I won't list all of them, but some of them would be Albany, Clayton, Columbus, Fort Valley. Some of you may remember I had Columbus on once for an interview on regional schools. 3.0 is good enough for those regional publics. And there's several others, including Savannah, North Georgia, Middle Georgia, and others. Then they have what they call their state colleges. And I'm not going to list all of them because there's around 10. And they are completely test optional like last year. So they basically created a 5-tier system all the way from Georgia and Georgia Tech, all the way down to the state colleges, anywhere from full required test scores to 3.4, 3.2, 3.0, or no scores. And they say test scores are still required for the highest merit scholarship, which is the Zell Miller. So there's an example of the kind of nuance that you're starting to see settle in. So a lot of talk around test scores, and I'll come back and talk with that more at another time, but I have some other things to point out. Another topic, the priority of early action. And it almost feels like November 1 is the new January 1. So we've seen this move for a long time. Students applying earlier and earlier, schools nudging people toward early action, schools coming up with creative ways of trying to get people to apply earlier. And, in the past, I think a lot of it was schools would see an early application as an indication of someone who's genuinely interested in them. But certainly what I heard of a lot at this conference was we are overwhelmed with the glut of apps that all come in 2 days before the deadline. So we're stressing that November 1 date just because it's the only way we can manage our reading caseload. So that was no question about that. There was a big emphasis on getting things in by November 1. Not that that's new, but it felt like it was even more of an emphasis than before. Another topic that's emerging, and we've talked about this in the podcast, but a lot of buzz around it. Schools questioning whether they should be using calculus as the way they have used it before as an indication of rigor. Just a lot of research showing that statistics, data science, other classes oftentimes are more aligned with school content, course content. And they're really asking themselves, why have we been so wedded to this you need calculus for some schools when it's not always the best course for alignment with curriculum? So several sessions on that, which was interesting. That's going to be completely school by school. So don't interpret this to mean calculus is no longer important, because things like this change very slowly. And for some schools and for some majors, I don't probably see that ever changing. But that certainly was a hot topic of conversation. The burnout of the admission officer. What can they do? How can we handle this? with the growth of the applications and the turnover just being insane. I mean, the Great Resignation has impacted college admissions as well. The growth of the regional admission officers, spreading more and more and more, schools finding to be a very financially viable way to reach a territory. And then more and more conversation models, examples out there of direct admit programs where schools have where students go on and complete a portal, and colleges can just go on there and admit students off the portal. In fact, Angel Perez actually said in one of his keynotes, and he's the president of NACAC, that he wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years that's a dominant model, which surprised me to hear him say that. I can see 20 years, but wow, that was quite a statement. So, instead of the students coming to you, you come to the students, basically. A lot of talk about affordability, and schools are going to have to do something about affordability. Good session by Eric Holder on that. What you're on, the path we're on is just not sustainable. Sorry, Jock Steinberg was the one. Just not sustainable right now. And so I expect to see a lot more creativity in that space, such as what Rochester's doing with their 3-year degrees. So overall, just a fantastic conference. For example, our last 2 interviews on Thursday, they all had, there in key roles, John Bockenstead, Heath Einstein, just so many others, just a great, great gathering. And guess what? Of course, I had to line up some more admissions interviews. So I'm going to mention some of the people that have committed. And if you're interested, you can send in questions, but I do need to give a caveat. If you're a parent of somebody in the junior class and you think, I'll send in questions to get information so they can use it for their application, that's just not, of a senior, that's just not going to work. Because some of these interviews, I'm going to tell you right now, they're not going to go live until about 18 months. But I do line them up and I get them committed, and then we just keep in touch, find a time, and then we go live. So I'll share all of the people that committed on this trip. I'm happy to say nobody turned me down, not one, which was kind of encouraging. But I have a little trick. So when you go to these events, they have a big college fair. Same thing at College Board next month. And I just go up and start talking face-to-face to the reps. And it's a lot harder for them to reject you to your face than it is over an email. So Bard College, it will be on for an interview. Now, Annandale, New York. So just so you know, I try to do a mixture between sort of brand name and underrated gems. Baylor University, Waco, Texas. Butler University, Indianapolis. I also try to do a little bit of a range when it comes to locations. Can't neglect the Midwest. Some people that are coming on that have already committed, I got to spend some good time with. Andy Strickler, Connecticut College, had a great conversation with him. Someone who committed a really long time ago, and we got to spend some really good time together. Andre Phillips from UW, Wisconsin-Madison. We spent some great time together, and he reaffirmed that he absolutely would be coming on the podcast, and he's actually going to be at College Board, so we're going to have some details down next month in Orlando. Cooper Union, fantastic school right in New York City. A lot of really cool programs when it comes to things like engineering and architecture, and very affordable. Then back to the great state of Colorado School of Mines, one of your top public engineering colleges you'll find in the country. And then don't get this confused, but 2 Cornells, Cornell College in Iowa. We had Colorado College on. This is the other great one, course at a time school. Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. Got a commitment from them and from the VP of enrollment there, Vice Provost actually, Jonathan Burdick at Cornell University. So I know that's one that several people have written in wanting to have on. Yeah, Cornell University committed. Creighton University, another Jesuit school. And it would actually be our first interview in Nebraska. So I'm kind of excited about that. And for anybody who's thinking, why are all these schools starting with B or C? That's because that's as far as I got in the alphabet going through the fair at 400 schools. By the time I got through B and C's, it was like time for the fair to end. So I never got past the C line, but I'll get some more commitments when we go to Orlando. I will say this. I went to a great event with a couple of Big Ten schools, and the presentations were fantastic. And I did secure commitments, and those commitments were from Carrie Rizek, Executive Director at the University of Minnesota, Mitch Warren, Assistant Vice Provost and Director of Admission at Purdue, and Andy Borst, who I've wanted to have on for quite some time, Director of Undergraduate Admissions at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So those are commitments that will be on the podcast. Feel free to send in questions. Just be patient. But with Monday and Thursday episodes, that's 104 episodes a year. We need plenty of interviews. And Lisa's still doing her thing, working on interviews for people that to focus on people who can help us to excel while in college.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, today we start a new interview. It is with Darrell Edmonds, the Deputy Director, University of Delaware. It's a different kind of part one. It's much more biographical. He really shares his story. So if you like biographies, it's how did he start out at Delaware, what he did over the next 20 years, and what brought him back to Delaware. And we focus on that in part one. And then part two, we really get into what's going on at the University of Delaware, changes, growth. How's the institution changed? What are the new and exciting things going on? So I think you'll enjoy it. It's a different kind of interview, and you have to listen and find out how I got this interview. I got this interview in a way that's unlike any of the other ones we've had so far. So listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Darrell Edmonds, and he's the Deputy Director of Admissions at the University of Delaware. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast there, Darrell.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on today. Really am.
Well, Darrell has a very interesting story of how we met, and I'm excited for you to be on today as well. Why don't you share it, Darrell?
All right. So, truth and everything is that I was a listener. I'm a listener first. I'm actually a parent of a rising college freshman who'll be starting in the fall, and someone who's worked in the college access field, college scholarship space for probably the past 15 to 20 years. So really started as a listener and someone who's just really enjoyed the content, the perspectives, the interviews, and that whole interaction and the educational pursuits of listening to the podcast. So that's how I kind of came into the space of meeting you, and just really actually started with an outreach, right?
Yeah, I was really happy. Darrell sent an email. He said, I'm a listener of the podcast, and I noticed you guys are expanding. You're going to 2 episodes a week. I think I have an interesting perspective to share that your listeners might be interested in. And so we had a fantastic conversation. We clicked right away. We know some of the same people. And of course, when I was living in Pennsylvania, you're not that far away from University of Delaware geographically. And so it was very evident right then that Darrell has an important message that I felt our listeners need to hear. But, we get a lot of college counselors and authors and different people that reach out and they want to get on the podcast. Either they're trying to get clients or sell books or something. I'd love to have more college admission officers reach out because that's, kind of our niche here, what we focus on, not exclusively, but primarily. So if you're a college admission officer out there and you're listening and we haven't featured your school, or if we did and it's a while ago and you have some updates you want to share, follow Darrell's example and reach out. So Darrell, let's hear about your backstory. Tell us, walk us through whatever you want to share, whatever you think would be of interest to our listeners so that they have a little understanding of who you are when we start talking about content.
Certainly. So I think it's important to start out with, I'm an alumni of the University of Delaware. I attended here, had a great undergraduate experience, and it kind of launched me off into I won't say my career initially. It really launched me off into kind of exploring who I was. And when I graduated, actually going back to college, I played football. It's a Division I football scholarship player here at the University of Delaware, and also a member of the gospel choir. Nice. So those were like 2 things that really shaped who I was and kind of, so I had these like leadership roles, but I also had this real faith based and like, grounding that was important to me. Right. So I hear you often talk about roots and wings. I tell
Sure,
folks all the time,
sure.
those are part of my roots. Right. That was something I
Yeah,
carried with me from home,
roots and
being
wings.
very involved in the church growing up, and something I sought out when I got to the college campus. So with those two things combined, I was captain of the football team. So I did a lot of interviews, a lot of speaking, and definitely had those strong faith roots. I had a lot of mentors, pushing me to be a preacher. And
Hmm.
so I ended up being a history major because history really rolled really well into seminary. However, a couple months before graduation, kind of had a real come to myself moment, which led to a come to Jesus moment. Really about I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in the pulpit. So I knew I wanted to do good things. I knew I wanted to impact people's lives. I knew I wanted to do some really good work, but really I didn't want to do it in the pulpit. So at that point, I was kind of um, in this limbo phase. I was graduating and going, into this life after undergraduate with little direction, honestly. However, I was still a musician, part of the gospel choir. I sang and played the piano. So I was a church musician. I was able to gig and I was making enough money to really, pay my small bills. Was married at the time. So little apartment, car, things like that. And, but my father, may he rest in peace, was a huge figure in my life, right? Like just bigger than life. And, very traditional man, old school. And even though I was working and making enough money as a musician, he never would say it, but I felt it. You got to get a real job too. You got to get started out. This music thing is
Hmm.
going to last forever. So I kind of stumbled into. Back then, we used to, actually open up the classifieds and read the newspaper for postings and jobs. And I found a couple jobs that were youth centered. And one I applied to and was hired to be a youth worker at a teen center. And
Now, is this all in Delaware still?
actually, I'm back in Jersey at this point,
Okay.
so maybe, half hour from University of Delaware, right up 295 over the bridge, not far. But,
And are
but
you
I'm
from
back in,
South Central or North Jersey?
I'm from the real South Jersey, right? The real South
Camden?
Jersey, right? Actually, closer to Atlantic City, closer to the
Atlantic
shore,
City.
right?
Okay.
And if you're from Jersey, there's no such thing as Central Jersey, but we won't get
Mm.
into that right now, right? But I'm from South Jersey, but where I was living at the time was actually closer to Camden. I was living in Woodbury, New Jersey, and I started working for a teen center, and like all the bells went off, all the light bulbs came on. I was like, this is amazing. Within a few weeks working there, I met a young man who came really like the first kid I mentored professionally, who just really changed my life, and I fell in love with the work, and I've been investing in the lives of teens ever since. With just positive youth development, um, making sure they had direction, focus for the future. It became more and more refined over the next few years at that time to really like post-secondary success, right? So then it was like, life after high school. I saw a lot of kids graduating from high school without a plan, no focus. And as great as it was to see them walk across that stage and I celebrate that moment, um, ultimately for a lot of them, a few years later, they'd be either in trouble or when the opioid epidemic got really bad, um, you would start to see a lot of other really disturbing and sad things happen. So I got into this line of just working with teens, and a few years later, I founded my own nonprofit, and that's really where the focus got, really tight for me. I started a nonprofit called Friday is Tie Day, and it was
Okay.
really, yeah, really aimed, and the name is what we do. A lot of our guys, we do wear ties to school on Friday, so I work with a lot of young men who are in public schools. Um, Primarily Black and Latino males, but not limited to. But the focus is on them because of the achievement gaps, that
Sure.
you see that are, really chasms in a lot of places. And I just didn't feel it was a lot of attention being paid to it in the spaces. I think people knew it existed, people wanted to do something, but I think for a lot of schools with all the demands that were on them, they had very little answers to really address it, intensely and intentionally. That's what it takes. So I started Friday as Tade with a focus of really helping these young men have a plan for life after high school. And, someone who came from a family where education was held really highly in high regard. College was always, my focus. College was the thing. Again, over time, we've been able to, grow and expand to really include in a really focused way, not just by default, but a really focused way. If you're focused on trade schools, we have relationships and spaces will go. If you're focused on going into military, we have successful, mentors that we can connect you with to get there. But it's really focused on, that college access. And of course, over time, really, the more and more you got in college, it's like we got to see them complete, right?
Sure.
It's you learn from being in the space, and that got me, an opportunity to work with a national organization, amazing organization called Give Something Back. Awesome philanthropist. His name is Bob Carr. He was really fortunate in his career to make a lot of money, and he sold his business. And he, after that, went around setting up for scholarships around the country. So he gave millions of dollars away to colleges and universities across the country to support students at that time who had either been impacted by the incarceration of a parent or students that were in foster care. So, supporting some of the most under-resourced students, to not only get to college, all the college, we would actually offer them the scholarship to college in the 9th grade. And we would support them throughout high school, right? Make sure they receive the coaching, the access, the resources to make sure they took classes with rigor. You know what I mean? To make sure that they got the opportunities to see the college campuses. And then once they got to the college campuses, they were met there by their scholarship. And we were in that space supporting students. And once again, the more, I was part of the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic branch. So we had colleges and students from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And that's kind of what brought me, to working with students in Delaware. And the scholarship was to the University of Delaware. And we had 150 scholarships. And we were bringing, close to 40 kids a year on campus.
Now, is Carr the money behind all of these, or is he
Yes,
just like...
yes, Carr was
wow.
the money behind it all. Yeah, that's another amazing story, when the work that they're doing. But I was fortunate to be connected with him through some great people and to have a chance to work with him. And because of my relationship with the University of Delaware,
Sure.
The Delaware kids and the Delaware relationship kind of became a little bit of a baby of mine.
Sure.
And
Plus, you're also an alum.
yeah, so I was an alum, so I was able to walk in and say, hey, this is me, this is what I did here. And they're like, we're glad to have you. But realizing bringing those students on campus, as much as the scholarship meant a lot, there were other gaps and resources that students from that, demographic needed additional support with to really navigate that space. So I was given an office on campus, so I was there, multiple days a week. We did mandatory study halls on Monday nights. We would bring in guest presenters to talk about, resources on campus, how to get tutoring, how to get additional support. We would, support kids with yoga class to help manage stress. It was an amazing opportunity. And again, to grow and to watch all the different touch points that students from that would be considered, first generation or even, under-resourced would face. And then we were smashed with the COVID pandemic, right? Working on campus, kids were coming back for that semester. So it was like, okay, we got an email. So listen, this is what's going to happen. We're going to start spring break a little early. We're going to get kids home because the first case in the state of Delaware, I believe, was at the University of Delaware.
Oh, wow. Now at this point, had they started having conversations with you about coming back and working for them, or was that later?
Not
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I mean, it was just a great mesh, great marriage. And, we were fine. We would support these kids. So, okay, they're going to have a little bit of an extended spring break. Then a few days later, the message got more, urgent. Listen, we're pack all your stuff. We're going to go virtual. And now, mind you, we had students in our group that were in foster care. So going home wasn't the norm for them. They needed to be supported on campus. They like the campus housing was their housing. So as much as we didn't have a whole lot of time to plan, the university was amazing, right? We had students that we were able to get housing even during that time where, I mean, this is like the real shutdown. Like, ghost
Sure.
town in a lot of places. We were able to keep those students housed. And then as we kind of slowly came back to a space where some kids were on campus, some weren't, all the kids that needed housing that were in our program were able to get housing. It was nothing but send the list, director of Res Life, here they go, they're housed, so we got to learn a lot. But then, the gaps in resources during that time, making sure that students had adequate access to technology to do the work. You just learn so much, right? You are just being as responsive as possible. And the University of Delaware was a great support. So that kind of just pulled us up to, the front seat of what it really, really means to support a student that's either not just first generation, but under resourced and underserved, and often on a lot of college campuses. And so my story really is like, with what I've done with students of color and students that come from some of the most difficult populations to serve, my tagline is if I can make sure that those students are successful and moving towards graduation, you can serve the most under-resourced and you can serve the most resourced and everybody in between. And you gain skills that not everybody sees.
So connect the dots for me with you're doing all this outreach through the nonprofit. You've got the office there, you're placing a lot of kids there, but all of a sudden you're the deputy director of admissions at Delaware. So there's something has to be there to connect those dots.
Certainly. So, of course, to make sure that these students were supported along that continuum, we work closely with the Office of Admissions. And again, in pre-pandemic years, we would also do on-campus immersion programs for our students. So we would bring them on for 3 or 4 days. We would jam-pack the schedule with opportunities to talk to admissions counselors, to get some leadership development, some personal development. Through my relationships and friendships with the university, we brought NFL football players on campus to talk to the students. We brought some other, inspirational keynote type speakers on campus and really built a program that was amazing, right? So we're doing this side by side, and folks from admissions learning not just the pre-college work that we've done along, college readiness. And, I wrote a small curriculum, put a whole booklet together, kind of like the steps you should be doing. So they got to see that stuff. Now they're seeing me work in the team work with students on campus, really looking at what it looks like, what a lot of pre-college programs look like when they bring students on campus. And then the additional support in continuing to make sure they're here and thriving on campus. So it was really seeing a lot of the work that's done in those more holistic admissions offices, right? Not just admitting students, but how do we build pipelines, right? Pipeline relationships with schools and even populations that we may have struggled with in the past to make sure that they can come to our university and be successful. So we got about 2 to 4 years of doing that together and seeing like what it takes. And that's how it kind of elevated to this space with admissions. It's like the skill sets, the tools and the things that you're doing, not just with Give Something Back, but also with Friday's Tie Day. Mm-hmm. I'm working with, again, predominantly young men of color. Overwhelming majority of them were attending 4-year universities. Some of them Ivy League universities. Actually, one of our first young men in the program, he attended University of Pennsylvania on electrical engineering. He's now back with our program. He's our robotics coach for our younger guys. He's our chief technology officer, right? So seeing that, there's one of our young men that kind of happened just before I started working at UD. He's actually a rising junior at the University of Delaware, a mechanical engineering major on the dean's list, doing really, really well. So it was also like there's some outcomes, right? There's some outcomes that they were able to see, not just in the direct relationships to students and Give Something Back, but in the work that I was doing Friday's Tie Day as well.
All right. So the university acknowledged the work you're doing and said, boy, we could use somebody like that on the inside on our team. Yeah. It's great that we got an office for you. Obviously, you're great roots, alumni, former football captain, all of this, but we feel you can do even more if you were actually on our admissions team. So when did you start actually is getting your paychecks from UD?
So just last year, so November 2021, really kind of made that transition over to work for the university. And it was, I wouldn't say it was seamless really, as far as, just the Office of Admissions there and
Mm-hmm.
the leadership there at the University of Delaware. Our VP of Enrollment Management, Rodney Morrison, is amazing, right? And our Executive Director of Admissions, Dr. Douglas Sander, also amazing. So the transition was seamless in that they really had a space for me to be me. There was a learning curve with anyone you come into an institution and you have to pick up with their systems and tools that they use to be successful. But as far as a space for me to do what it is that I do best, um, it almost felt tailor made.
Sure.
There's an amazing team that I joined there.
So I want to talk about the reasons you came back. And our regular listeners may know I did a spotlight on the University of Delaware maybe 18 months ago, something like that, which I know Darrell's had a chance to hear a couple times. And so I've asked him to talk about a few things, why he came back, and also shed light on anything that's changed since what I covered in that spotlight. Or maybe I didn't emphasize enough. I mean, you've heard the spotlight. I know you indicated that you liked it, but there's been some new development. So I'm interested in either one of those things, commenting on why you came back, as well as just things the University of Delaware is offering that either are new or maybe I didn't emphasize enough in that spotlight I did.
Awesome. So I'll start with why I came back. I had an amazing experience at the University of Delaware as an undergrad. And once again, to be my full authentic self and to grow and to spread my wings, right? So, of course, I definitely had played football, and I had a great opportunity to do some leadership things there, be the captain, and I had a great career there. Wouldn't change it for the world. But, like I said, I was always also involved in the gospel choir. Got some great leadership opportunities from that and working with administration at the university and planning events. So the University of Delaware has for years. So since I was there, and it continues for, the 20 years since I've been graduated, there's a Center for Black Culture at the University of Delaware that has existed since the 70s. And in the Center for Black Culture is something called the Cultural Programming Advisory Board. And that is a student leadership organization that's given a budget to plan programming that's important to us. So within that programming, for as long as I remember, and even as a student, there's been a budget for us to hold, I believe it was a spring gospel rama, right? So we would do 2 exposures for the gospel choir each year, something in the fall and something in the spring. And I believe it was a spring gospel rama where we actually had a budget to bring in a gospel recording artist, right? And to even learn that process was pretty,
Sure.
engaging with, artists, their writer, engaging with the university and making sure all the pieces like that, those are skills, around the event planning and leadership that we were able to really exercise there. And the university really had a platform for that, right? And it wasn't something we had to fundraise for. It was something that's been important to the university for that time and moving forward. So things like that. One of the other things that we were able to do during my junior year, we decided for spring break, instead of going and hitting up, some town and going nuts, we were church kids. So we wanted to do a tour with the gospel choir. We wanted to actually do I think we ended up doing like 6 cities, a 6-city tour over spring break. So we had a plans, to go to our home churches and our communities to raise the money, but the tour was going to cost a lot for the travel and the hotel. So because of my privilege of being on the football team, I did have a little bit more access than others. So I was able to walk into our president's office at the time and say, this is our plan. If we raise this much, would you match it? He said, absolutely. So we were on a tour that year.
Learned a good lesson.
Yeah, and
Being
I
bold.
definitely recognize my privilege in that, but it
Sure.
was also a skill, it was
Sure.
also something I was able to do. So I had opportunities like that, along with the amazing group of friends and brothers that I built there that we communicate with to this day. We have a 15 plus year old fantasy football league. We've got, reunions that we do annually. Those were the things that made UD so special to me that I had to consider coming back to, right?
Sure. So it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is one of the reasons you came back is you had such great memories and the institution was so supportive to you while you were a student that you had that conviction of, you know what, I can represent this place with integrity because
Yes.
I see what it's done for me, and I would be proud to be able to tell others about it. Were there any other things? Because obviously, there's a difference between you now and you as a 18 to 22-year-old. Were there any other things the university was either doing or that had changed that got you excited about coming back from when you were a student till now?
Yes, absolutely. So the university was still doing all those things, right, that they were doing 20, 25 years ago when I was there that were important for me to be successful. But they'd added, some things that were really important, especially when it comes to not just recruiting, but supporting underserved, minority or first gen communities. Those pockets of the population that have often been difficult to serve and meet the same outcomes as
Sure.
a lot of students on the campus. So one that was really, really interesting to me was a partnership. So this kind of leads into you did an amazing job, right? An amazing job with the spotlight. Uh, it was very much on brand. A lot of the things that we even cover in our own presentation and admissions, right? If you come to our visitor center. So kudos to you for that. But I'm going to try and marry these two responses and these two conversations now. University of Delaware, you did mention, was the first university, right, to do study abroad,
Sure.
right? So over, 100 study abroad programs to over 40 countries. Even today, we have some really unique study abroad opportunities. One in particular was a partnership with a amazing woman that I met doing a fellowship back in 2024. And she was actually just starting this program. It's called Leaders
Now,
of the Free World.
2024 is a couple years
I'm
from
sorry,
now.
2014. Yeah, I do try
Okay.
and travel a little bit,
Yeah.
only in my
Hey,
sleep.
I only caught that because I make that same mistake.
Yeah,
I keep putting 2002 instead of 2022, and
yeah,
I even say it in podcasts, and sometimes I miss it on the editing, and then we have such a great sound engineer, Nemanja. I can think of two occasions he said, you said 2002 again, and I had to go back. So anyway, that's how I caught that one. Go ahead.
yeah. So I was able to meet this amazing woman. Her name is Ruby Maddox. In 2014, we were both in a fellowship together, and she was in the brainstorming, forming phase of putting together an organization called Leaders of the Free World. And it was about encouraging men of color, in particular Black men, to experience study abroad
Mm,
opportunities. So coming back to this time at UD, knowing what the study abroad options were, and maybe the day I walk into the front door, there's an article in U Daily, which is our daily publication online, that talks about Leaders of the Free World in a partnership with UD, and I'm like, this is amazing, and aside from that, getting back to the whole pitch piece about study abroad, we also have what we call a World Scholars Program, um, which you apply to as you apply freshman year of college, and it pretty much guarantees you're going to have at least 2 semesters overseas. One being your very first semester as a freshman. So we have students right now that are preparing to be in Madrid, Spain, to be in Greece, or even New Zealand for their fall semester freshman year. So that's one of the things that really brought me back and made it special when I can see the partnerships are really intentional and partnerships with people I knew, right?
sure. And I'm sure you're probably looking at how you can take some of these first-gen kids and students of color, in some cases under-resourced, and give them a whole global vision that can change the whole parameters through which they can see the world and really profoundly impact them. And I feel really strongly about that too. In fact, my oldest daughter, she's Miss World Traveler. She'd been to Honduras 5 times by the time she was 19 and Kenya
Wow.
twice.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take me a while. But at the school that she went to, I've actually endowing a scholarship that's for kids, under-resourced kids, to take their first study abroad trip.
Awesome.
And it's a missions trip too. So it's like, it's both service as well as exposure. So my heart is very similar to yours there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and again, this goes back to my time with Friday's Tidy. There were a number of kids that, when we got busy with our trips and college tours, some of the kids that I worked with had never left the county, never left the area code. So to have the opportunity to expose them to different opportunities and to now be able to take that same concept, that same energy, that same work that I've become passionate about to a university scale. And we're talking about study abroad opportunities. That group with Leaders of the Free World actually be leaving for Ghana in maybe a week or two, right?
Nice.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So the other piece that I think was really strong about bringing me back to UD was they were very interested in me, in the work that I do, right? Very interested in how do we continue to support pipelines for students from these backgrounds? How do we continue to create opportunities for students to be prepared to go to college and then to get here to be supported? So that was super important to me because that's part of my DNA.
Sure.
As part of who I am, I'm very aware of that. And the University of Delaware was like, we want all of that. We have admissions folks that do a great job with admissions, but we want that niche work. We want that intentional focus on these populations, and to make sure that's a part of the lens that we view admissions through. So that was really, really important to me. And I definitely feel it on the side. It's very much a part of what the university wants and the direction the university is headed.
Friends, this completes the first half. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. All right, friends, next week in the news, we start out with an article with Dave. Dave and I will be talking about a great article that appeared in slate.org, and it says, what you need to know about financial aid, it's a sham. That's a really important article. I hope that you will listen to that segment. I think it's one of the more important in the newses. And then for our question from a listener, Lisa and I will be taking a question, came in anonymously from a student who wants to know, I reached out to a particular teacher I wanted to write a recommendation for, and they told me, write my own recommendation, and they will sign it. Question is, what should she do? And finally, we'll continue with John Bockenstedt in part 2 of ethical versus unethical admission practices. And friends, I have to close out by not saying what I always say this time, but just saying this. Don't let anybody guilt trip you in your school, parent, in your community, because they don't think your child or you are going to a prestigious enough college. Look at all the people that didn't even go to college that are doing great things. And I'll share more of them over the course of the year. But Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, didn't even graduate from college. He started and dropped out. Mark Zuckerberg started and dropped out. Founder of Facebook, Steve Jobs, started at Reed College, dropped out. And we could go on and on. Richard Branson, founder of the Virgin Group, started and dropped out. Oprah Winfrey, 1 year. Now, listen, I'm not encouraging dropping out. I'm just saying if people don't even need to graduate, then certainly you don't need to go to Brand Name U to have a successful year. And I'll throw one more out for today. Michael Dell, founder of Dell Computers, started out at UT Austin and dropped out. All right, friends. See you next week. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.